A member of Congress of this body, Ilhan Omar, said Charlie Kirk was Dr. Frankenstein and his monster shot him through the neck.
You know, there are a lot of people who are out there talking about him just wanting to have a civil debate.
Complete rewriting of history.
And so, you know, these people are full of shit, and it's important for us to call them out.
Did you catch that? That wasn't just some random person online saying something outrageous. That was an actual sitting member of Congress making a statement about a political assassination. Welcome back, everyone. Today, we're breaking down a clip featuring Representative Brandon Gill as he forcefully challenges what was said during a recent hearing. He's calling out what could be one of the most chilling and controversial responses to a tragedy we've seen from Washington in a long time. If you think political divisions are already intense, just wait until you hear the data he presents. According to him, the numbers suggest one side may be far more open to political violence than the other, and he claims to have the evidence to back it up. This is something you'll want to see in full. Let's take a closer look.
Violence is wrong, it's evil, regardless of which side it comes from, and that we can all adamantly and vehemently reject it, or we certainly should. But one of the things that we've noticed recently is that affinity and tolerance for political violence is not equally distributed on both sides of the aisle. In fact, right now, social media is filled with leftists who are cheering on the murder of an iconic conservative political figure, Charlie Kirk. And it's not just random people on Twitter doing this now. There's a YouGov poll released just a few days ago, which stated that 25% of those who identify as very liberal believe that political violence can sometimes be justified. That's far too many, is it not? It is.
One is far too many.
One is far too many. That's right. Only 3% of very conservatives said the same thing, and we can agree that 3% is far too many. But there's an astounding difference between 25% on the left accepting and tolerating political violence and 3% on the right.
Now, to add more depth to Brandon's numbers, we're going to take a look at older surveys, specifically the one conducted by the Public Religion Research Institute and the Brookings Institute. In 2021, they asked, quote, if respondents agreed that because things have gotten so far off track, true American patriots may have to resort to violence in order to save our country. Back then, only 15% of Americans agreed. Fast forward to 2023, and that number jumped to 23%. That's a troubling trend, because with each passing year, more people are starting to believe violence is an acceptable response to political disagreement. So you might be wondering, what's the root cause behind these numbers? I'll let Gil do the explanation.
One of the more astounding aspects of this is that it's not just people. This comes from the very top, from their political leaders. Just a few days ago, a member of Congress of this body, Ilhan Omar, shared a video on her social media account about Charlie Kirk's murder, and I'll quote what it said. It said, Charlie Kirk was Dr. Frankenstein, and his monster shot him through the neck. In other words, Charlie had it coming to him. The words that he said naturally led to his assassination. I mean, that is a reprehensible thing for a member of Congress to say, to suggest, to promote in any capacity. And there are people across this country who are losing their jobs for far less than this. And that, by the way, is a just response to acceptance and tolerance of political violence.
What I do know for sure is that, you know, Charlie was someone who once said, guns save lives. After a school shooting. Charlie was someone who was willing to debate and downplay the death of George Floyd in the hands of Minneapolis police.
I think he called him a scumbag.
Right, have no regard. And I think, there are a lot of people who are out there talking about him just wanting to have a civil debate.
Complete rewriting of history.
Yeah, there is nothing more effed up, than to completely pretend that his words and actions have not been recorded and in existence for the last decade or so. And so, these people are full of shit, and it's important for us to call them out while we feel anger and sadness and have empathy, which Charlie said no, it shouldn't exist because that's a newly created word or something.
It's amazing to me that the political left today, who were the originators and the cheerleaders of cancel culture, now have the backbone to attack conservatives for defending their assassinated friend. But there's a key difference here. Democrats want to silence conservatives for speaking obvious, self-evident, ontological truths. Republicans, by contrast, are recognizing that a constitutional republic depends on the free and open exchange of ideas that we can debate without violence, and that assassinating a political rival is evil, it's wrong, and it should not be glorified or promoted or justified in any way, including in the way that Congresswoman Ilhan.
All right, we need to unpack this, because there's a lot going on here, and not in a good way. It's hard to even know where to begin. First, credit where it's due, Brandon Gill didn't hold back. Reading those kinds of quotes into the congressional record takes nerve, and whether you agree with him or not, he clearly wanted to make a point that he felt wasn't being addressed. Now, let's get into the controversy surrounding Ilhan Omar's remarks. Her comments comparing a recently assassinated individual to Dr. Frankenstein and suggesting his monster was responsible sparked a lot of backlash. Critics argue that framing crosses a line into victim blaming and comes across as deeply insensitive given the circumstances. Supporters, on the other hand, say she was making a broader political point, though that hasn't stopped the criticism from intensifying. A big part of the reaction has been about perceived double standards. Some are asking, if a politician from the other side had made similar comments, would the response be more severe? That question is fueling a lot of the outrage and debate. Then there are the statistics Gill cited, which added another layer to the discussion. He pointed to polling suggesting a gap in attitudes toward political violence between different ideological groups. Numbers like that can be powerful, but they also depend heavily on how the questions were asked, the sample size, and the broader context. Without that detail, it's hard to draw firm conclusions, even if the figures sound striking. The follow-up interview defending those comments didn't calm things down either. For many viewers, the tone came across as lacking remorse, which only added to the perception that something important was being brushed aside. Others interpreted it as a refusal to backtrack under pressure. What this really highlights is how heated and polarized political discourse has become. Disagreement is one thing, that's part of any democracy, but when rhetoric starts to feel dehumanizing or dismissive of violence, it raises concerns across the board. Gill's argument ultimately centers on calling out what he sees as inconsistency and pushing for accountability. Whether people see that as leadership or as partisan framing depends a lot on where they already stand. At the end of the day, the bigger issue is this: how do we talk about political opponents, especially in the aftermath of violence, without making an already divided environment even worse? That's the question a lot of people are wrestling with right now.